So, yes, gutting FEMA and then most likely privatizing that disaster relief is what Trump's goal is. This is not Trumpian inherently. This is a conservative project, right? And this is a conservative project. Now, Donald Trump visited yesterday North Carolina and California's disaster zones. And in that process, he talked about a number of different things. Now, of course, under normal circumstances, when a president of a country with 330 million with varying different political opinions goes and visits a disaster zone, most of the conversation is supposed to revolve around hardening the infrastructure, offering immediate relief as expeditiously as possible. Money is no object here, is what presidents are supposed to say. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is not a normal president. Donald Trump went to North Carolina and California and decided to have two very different experiences. He went to North Carolina and behaved somewhat presidential, but even then, not super presidential. But in California, he decided to take it up a notch. In both of these places, Donald Trump looked at the devastation born out of anthropogenic climate change and the ecological collapse that is happening in real time. One of the most tangible impacts of this ecological disaster is, of course, natural disasters that are seemingly once in a lifetime that have now become all too commonplace. Donald Trump looked at that devastation and said, you know what we need to do? Defund the one government federal program and agency that actually works to actively provide real-time relief to these disaster zones. Okay? Please show us the code. I have to go to work soon. Okay, the fashion autists need to dial it back, dude. Here, I'm going to show you the code. Jesus Christ. I went to a secondhand store last night. Okay? Here, I'm going to put the code on. Jesus Christ, dude. Holy shit. Here. Can you see? It's sick. It's got like the side opening, and you can even button it if you want. There's numerous different ways of wearing it too. It's a Japanese brand called Stein. And normally it costs a brick. Okay? Actually, I don't know how much it costs normally. Guess how much I got it for? Let's look at this brand actually. Let's look at this brand. Stein trench coat. Yeah, this is it. Stein oversized double lapel trench coat is 162,800 yen. Okay, which is what, like $1,000? So it's a singular brick. You know how much I got it for? $200. It's crazy out here, dude. Everyone is dripped out the wazoo. It was on sale because ain't nobody out there buying a coat that big. Nah, I think people buy oversized stuff. I just got crazy lucky. That's it. Anyway, I have been on FTN, my girlfriend nonstop. Where should I be detained and validated by? Dude, I don't know. I don't know how to answer your question. I know the heart you have. I'm asking you, please open up and hear me. ICE will be the worst natural disaster I've lived through in the first 23 years of my life. Was spent in Alabama, berated by hurricane after hurricane. I've been on FaceTime with my girlfriend nonstop as I'm worried she could be detained and violated by ICE. Chatter, I don't know. I don't know what to help you. I don't know what to do to help you. Like, I can't give you legal advice. You have to look for a legal organization. Like, there are nonprofit organizations that are specifically designed. We fundraise for them all the time. Depending on where you live, you should reach out to an immigration lawyer through a 501c3. You can't, I can't give you legal advice as a Twitch streamer. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. Please. Good luck to you and your girlfriend. People look up to you, man. Be patient. Okay, but there's 30,800 people in here. And the chatter thinks that I'm capable of, like, being able to single-handedly change the trajectory of his life. I can't do that. Okay? Like, that's insane, guys. Like, I don't have the physical power to stop a potential raid. It's okay, man. Just don't yell, maybe. Please don't take this the wrong way, please. Oh my God. Now we're going to talk about the way I'm dealing with chat. Okay, we're going to continue. with
official
or
trip
not ICE, with Trump's visit to North Carolina and California. We're going to talk about ICE as well.
Taking the White House, President Trump toured disaster zones. He first visited western North Carolina, where communities are still grappling with the aftermath of the catastrophic flooding from Hurricane Helene in September. While there, Trump said he was considering dismantling FEMA and possibly shifting more disaster management responsibilities to states. The president reiterated those sentiments after surveying the destruction from the California wildfires. Jonathan Vigliotti has more on the West Coast visit.
As Air Force One touched down in Los Angeles, fires were still smoldering throughout Southern California.
I don't understand what's happening. We can't get a break.
One of the worst weather disasters in U.S. history has left behind overwhelming devastation. At least $250 billion in damage. President Trump met with firefighters and residents here in Pacific Palisades and saw the rubble firsthand.
Not even believable. It's really not believable.
Doesn't getting rid of FEMA just fuck red states? I think it definitely has a devastating impact on red states for sure. But it cooks all states. It especially cooks red states because red states are poorer by and large. Red states have worse infrastructure as a consequence of being poorer by and large. There's worse. There's more. There's not more income inequality, but there's just more poverty, abject poverty in red states in general. And poverty is one of the clearest indications that you will be screwed over by climate collapse. So, yes, gutting FEMA and then most likely privatizing that disaster relief is what Trump's goal is. This is not Trumpian inherently. This is a conservative project, right? And this is a conservative project for a very long time. Trump is just seemingly the guy who's going to push it to the next level. We'll see how it works out. But yes, the impact of it will be awful.
I don't think you can realize how rough it is, how devastating it is until you see it.
Even when the president met with hurricane victims in North Carolina Friday morning, he had California on his mind.
Why they aren't releasing the water? Millions and millions of gallons of water. They're sending it out to the Pacific. Someday somebody's going to explain that one. In the meantime, they have no water in Los Angeles.
It's a claim he's made repeatedly on social media, saying California's governor could open up the water main and let the water flow into his dry, starving, burning state instead of having it go out into the Pacific Ocean. CBS News has fact-checked that claim. It is false. Experts have told CBS News that additional water from other parts of the state would not have made a difference to the firefighting response. Data shows most of California's reservoirs at or above historic levels. But during those critical first few hours in Pacific Palisades, a reservoir built to offer protection was dry, undergoing repairs, and there was inadequate water pressure. In an interview Wednesday with Fox News host Sean Hannity.
Okay, when you do that, as the media, you might as well be not fact-checking at all. Like, you brought up the reservoir that didn't have water in it. Conservatives look at that and go, okay, so what is that fact check? It undermines the previous fact check that you made. You have to follow that up by saying all of the water resources readily available in Southern California actually had above average water. So clearly, if additional water coming in from other states was not going to yield a tangible positive benefit in this situation, that one reservoir was not going to change the outcome either, and that the problem wasn't actually inadequate water supply, but the fact that we don't have pumps. Like the fact that, one, it is virtually impossible to use water hydrants to combat a fire that was spreading at 100 miles. That's number one. And this is, I'm not a fire marshal, okay? I'm not like a professional at this. I'm simply listening to what fire experts have said, like people who are tasked with investigating what's going on here and people who have experience combating both wildfires and structural fires in general. These two things are different than one another. Wildfires are different than structural fires. That's number one. And number two, as far as the structural fires goes, when you combine 100-mile winds and wildfires with a dense area, like a dense urban landscape, it is impossible for a normal fire department, like a municipal fire department, to combat fires of that severity. Impossible, because water hydrants are there to, put down a structural fire in an entire city block. Water hydrants are not capable of combating fires in every city block. Like if the wildfires, especially with 100-mile winds or 80-mile winds, are spreading the fire to virtually every structure, it is impossible to save an entire city with simply water hydrants alone. Okay? I work in fire sprinkler systems. The systems and buildings are only designed to have one building on fire at a time, and a few fire trucks taking water from the hydrants, not thousands of fires at once. Exactly. Like, think about it this way. It's like a fire tornado. Okay? If you can't stop a normal tornado, then you definitely can't stop a fire tornado. Do you understand? Like, this doesn't mean that there can't be better protections and infrastructure hardening ahead of time. Okay? Mitigation is and prevention is one of the most important aspects of fire safety. These guys, on the other hand, are using this water reservoir conversation to look at the California water wars and greatly extend it. Make the California water wars worse in general. There is already an issue with allocation. There's already an issue with irrigation in the state. Trump wants to make it worse. And he is not above using this natural disaster to make that political point. Having said that, initially, in the interim period, were there other structures that could have been preserved and saved? Most likely. Was there a water allocation problem? Yes. This wasn't because of the reservoirs, though. This was simply because there wasn't electric generators or the electric pumps necessarily that actually move water from reservoirs into the hydrants were decommissioned because they shut down the energy in these regions. And there was no fail-safe that, there were no electric generators that continued pumping water, as far as I understand. Right? Normally, the electric pumps that move water around within the system are powered by the same electric grid that powers everything else. But when you shut down the electric grid because you don't want to start new electric start new fires born out of short circuiting alongside the existing electricity grid, because of those winds, you end up shutting off the pumps, and water cannot move around as easily as it's supposed to, and you arrive at this problem. Okay? But time will tell. There will be investigations that are conducted, and time will tell. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has no interest in figuring out what the truth is, because if you're not interested in solving a problem and instead are simply interested in using an existing problem to do propaganda, then you don't need to figure out the truth at all. You could just immediately go, these fires happen because there wasn't enough water in California, and that the best way to solve it is to ensure that we dam the San Joaquin Valley Reservoir and the waterways up there and send more water down to Southern California so that the agribusiness can thrive. It's just an extensive project that a lot of the agricultural producers in Southern California have wanted for quite some time, and Trump is using this as an opportunity to advocate for that. It seems like this would be, at least according to experts once again, it seems like this would lead to further ecological disaster in the San Joaquin Valley. So it's ironically accelerating the the main accelerant that is responsible for having so much dry brush, for example, so much fuel readily available in Southern California. As I've talked about before, especially as it pertains to Southern California wildfires, a period of historic flooding, okay, like historic wet season flooding, followed by a period of historic drought in the next subsequent wet season, creates first a massive amount of brush and then completely sucks the moisture out of that brush, creating what is known as fuel. Okay? So it's devastating. And then you pair that up with you pair that up with atmospheric pressure and faster winds as a consequence of that, and all of a sudden you have created this perfect chaotic situation where these unimaginable, once in a lifetime natural disasters become incredibly commonplace. There's two things that you can do in this process. Why not use water from the ocean? They do. It's a last resort in this situation, but they of course use that. Okay. There's two things you have to do, right? Yes, these are optimal conditions for maximum devastation. One, when you have a complex problem like this, the solution is always multifaceted. Ironically enough, by the way, if you want to ask about the ocean water, it's salt water. Okay? So salt water actually has devastating long-term consequences as well. When you pump salt water, like those super cool planes that come in and pick up the ocean water and then dump it on top of the wildfires, when you actually do that consistently, you're literally killing the vegetation and creating even more dry vegetation down the line for future wildfires. So it's actually literally a last-ditch effort. Salting the land is devastating for the vegetation, hence salt the earth. So you're changing the soil. You're also drying out the future vegetation that creates even more brush, more dry brush, which is known as fuel for even more devastating wildfires down the line. So it is done, okay? But of course, it's used as a last resort. And we certainly used it quite extensively this time around in combating these massive wildfires. Okay? Now, in terms of methods of combating this, like I said, this is a very complex problem. So the solutions are also multifaceted. On the one hand, you have to try. Are you just reading shit? No, I'm just explaining this to you from the top of my dome because I've explained it a million times over. So I'm just repeating the same things that I've said possibly at least 1,000 times in the last month or so. Okay? So as I was saying, on the one hand, you have to scale back our carbon footprint to the best of our ability and create structures that are harder to burn down. But even if it's not the structures itself that are harder to burn down, you have to also do constant maintenance of the vegetation around structures where people live. Okay? This requires funds. So on the one hand, you have to engage in systemic change to try and mitigate climate change, right? To scale back to the best of our ability so that we don't, so that, we don't all die in the climate apocalypse. On the other hand, you also have to ensure that our infrastructure is up to code. Change the regulations surrounding the way we build buildings in wildfire-prone areas, and also change the way we change the vegetation around it. You know what I mean? Change the maintenance of the vegetation around it. Make sure that there's like proper upkeep. Make sure that the government is also consistently making sure that people are following this code. All of this stuff is pesky regulation and code that a lot of homeowners despise. Donald Trump also despises it. Okay? Enforcing native plant standards to ensure that we don't have eucalyptus trees, for example, that are literally filled to the brim with explosive material is like one of the things that you could do. You know, making sure that we have underground power lines, no matter the cost, is another thing that we must do in terms of hardening the infrastructure, right? If Los Angeles is prone for the power grid consistently failing, you either have to do rolling blackouts during wind season and wildfire season to ensure that these downed power lines don't end up, causing short circuits and electrical failures that are right on top of dry vegetation that is overgrown, right? And create wildfires like the Paradise one, the Campfire one from a couple years back. Or you have to, with the existing infrastructure that we have, make sure that all of the power lines are clearly maintained and far away from any kind of vegetation whatsoever. Okay. And last but not least, and like I said, the rebuilding efforts. We should be doing the exact opposite of what the California government has said that they're going to do, which is build the buildings in the exact same way as fast as possible. But that's too complicated, and it's too costly for businesses that want to turn profit year over year. They would rather gamble with our lives and not do the necessary updates, knowing full well that the politicians are bought and sold anyway, and therefore will never hold them to account and will never actually demand that they take the initiative at the behest of public safety. And politicians like Donald Trump will look at the situation and use it to their advantage to propagandize one of their pet projects at the behest of certain key sectors that have been able to communicate to him the necessity for more climate disaster inducing decisions in terms of irrigation. From what I understand, historically, California wasn't necessarily a desert land in the way that we see it. It was, a century of water mismanagement that made it certainly a lot less lush. So Donald Trump using this as an opportunity is expected. Using this as an opportunity to further his agenda is expected, and yet still devastating.
The president also
One
suggested
key element you're missing, no hate, is the suburban sprawl and lack of density causing huge encroachment on nature. I mean, sure, that's a part of it. And also super susceptible to the most devastating impacts of climate change, like Malibu. Everyone knows that when you build in Malibu, you're building on borrowed time. Okay? The investment that you've made is against time, The investment that you've made is against time. Either your house is going to fall victim to landslides caused by erosion, or it's going to directly be underwater at a certain point, right? Except instead of those two things happening, they were burned to the ground. Then why make those investments? Because we are hyper-focused on short-term profit seeking. That's it. Short-term always. We have no capacity to think in decades. We have no capacity to think in centuries. We only think in quarterly profits. That's it. That is capitalism. Okay? So ultimately, no matter how much I yell about these issues, changes seem impossible. Okay? And our government is not designed to put long-term stability and the people's interests above short-term profit seeking. Are these all the Republicans' fault or Dems as well? Oh, absolutely. The Democrats play a role in this. This is California, baby. This is a Democratic safe haven. This is a Democratic stronghold. This also is part of the problem with the next century of global politics. Western capitalist nations have completely lost the capacity to take initiative against capital. Western capitalist nations are servile to corporate interests. Everybody kind of understands this. Some people have a nihilistic perspective on it, and they think, that's just the system. Now I'm just going to get my money up. I'm going to be a servant myself. And hopefully one day, if I'm lucky enough, I can dominate and be a billionaire too. Right? And I don't think people understand. Corporate interests and constant profit seeking is antagonistic to good governance. Okay? That's it. Because when I say good governance, responsible governance, a government that is tasked with uplifting the welfare of its citizens, okay? I mean, like, sometimes taking the initiative and not engaging in short-term profit seeking, and maybe even sometimes doing things that corporations are going to absolutely despise. Gun violence is a great example of this because it is not a natural disaster, and yet it is treated as such in the United States of America. Gun violence is a problem born out of gun manufacturers and their interest in profit. Okay? It is a viable and robust industry in this country, gun manufacturing. And because of that, we have this attitude where gun violence is just another aspect of natural American life, as though it is a natural disaster. It is not a natural disaster at all. And people just simply lie to maintain this position, right? Gun violence is not like 100-mile winds. Gun violence is not like a typhoon. It's not like a massive, devastating earthquake. It's not like tornado season, right? Those things, no matter how hard we try, are still going to be impossible at a certain point to combat. You know, shit happens. Gun violence, on the other hand, is not that at all. That's precisely the reason why it's virtually non-existent in other countries, whereas it is a part of daily existence in the United States of America. Think about gun violence. I'm in Japan right now. This is not an issue here. Why? It's because the Japanese industry does not have a robust gun manufacturing business that has been able to completely capture the entirety of its government and will work to change our cultural attitudes surrounding gun violence or surrounding guns in general. And therefore, it's not a problem here. That's it, with some exceptions. Shinzo Abe comes to mind. Anyway, let's get back to Donald Trump. Now that I've spent the last 30 minutes trying to pore over everything that he said and try to explain to people why it's stupid and what the actual complicated solutions are.
Withholding federal aid for recovery.
California anything until they let water flow down.
It's rare to put conditions on disaster relief, but he also called for California to adopt a voter ID law that would check for citizenship before granting aid. But while meeting with local leaders on Friday, the president said he wants to see Los Angeles start rebuilding as soon as possible.
We're going to essentially waive all federal permits. We're going to have you go very quickly.
On Friday, California legislators approved $2.5 billion in state funds to help with cleanup and rebuilding. As Governor Newsom greeted the president, politics were set aside.
I appreciate the governor coming out and meeting me, Kevin.
And politics aside, fire crews are still fighting fires. They will get some help over the weekend. The area expecting its first significant rainfall in more than 8 months. But with it comes the threat of mudslides. For CBS Saturday Morning, Jonathan Vigliotti.